up, we have our next keynote speaker who will be talking about predicting the future and attribution. I'd like you to give all a warm welcome to Andy from Crimtan, who's our next keynote speaker. While he waits for the clicker, Andy is the Chief Commercial Officer at Crimtan, but do not be put off by his height, I've been told, because apparently Andy grew a foot. For those that are Gen Z, that's 30 centimeters, in a year, aged 14, and when doctors might have known better, was prescribed a pint of Guinness a day for 3 months. Hopefully, he hasn't been on that this morning. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Lovely. It still feels like a bit of a novelty to have so many people in the room post-pandemic. So anyway, any other Guinness teenagers around, or is it just me? Okay, I think I'm going to have a word with my doctor about that one. This is a presentation focusing on something that's very close to every marketer's heart, and that is measurement. So, in fact, it's quite aligned with a number of the other kind of points that have been put across in the presentations, around fragmentation generally. So I'm going to talk about generally the problem that we're facing at the moment around fragmentation of measurement. And I think, with the challenges around privacy and the challenges around consent, it's really time for every brand to take control of their own measurement and, make sure that they don't rely too much on big tech to give them all the answers, to customize their own conversion signals and look beyond the closed networks and walled gardens, because there's no such thing as a single channel customer anymore. But before I start, quickly about me, I'm Andy Houstoun. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Crimtan. I've been in and around digital and e-commerce for about 20 years. So I started my career in a small little outfit that was fulfilling groceries online called Tesco.com. We ran it on an Access database and used to fax the orders down to stores. So a lot's changed then, like since then, both I guess in buying groceries online, but also around digital generally. I work for a company called Crimtan. We are an ad tech company, so we are programmatic and data solutions specialists. And what we focus on is trying to provide lots of interesting answers around what drives good performance. But we've also, over the last 12 years, for those of you who don't know programmatic, it is a framework that sits behind digital ads. So traditionally, it used to be the banners on news sites, but more recently, with the digitization of out-of-home placements and connected TV, catch-up TV, and all that sort of stuff, the framework is expanding rapidly. Crimtan itself has been around about the same amount of time as programmatic advertising, and they've built an engine to try and deliver greater relevancy and measurement across that programmatic framework. But we're all facing the same challenge, and really that is with the biggest change in digital targeting since 1994, and I'll explain why 1994. That's not when I started my Guinness experiment, but something else. How can we keep up with measuring what is driving good performance across all our marketing channels? And really, the biggest challenge around this is the fragmentation of the actual technology for measurement. So in 1994, cookies were created. Actually looking out into the rather useful audience, some of you might not have been even born by then, but as I say, I was kind of on my Guinness experiment at that point. And since cookies have been created, unfortunately, they've been used and abused. So there was a bit of a reset that happened around about 2018. You might have heard it, General Data Protection Regulation. And actually, what the General Data Protection Regulation tried to do was there's a piece of personal data called a pseudonymous ID within a cookie. And what it tried to do was to make sure that anyone using that particular ID needed to gather consent for the purpose of doing so. So cookies were created. Lots of people started using cookies for lots of different things outside of measurement, mainly around targeting and stuff like that. And so first thing that happened was GDPR was already kind of on the timeline for 2018. Apple introduces something called the Intelligent Tracking Prevention Solution 1.0. And what that started to do was to start to identify and block tracking cookies. If we fast forward now to the current day, Apple now have ITP 2.3. Everyone in ad tech loves a good acronym. And that now actually just third-party cookies are dead, and first-party cookies, the useful ones that potentially you can store, basket information on and stuff like that, are only valid for 24 hours before Safari browser actually wipes it out. So Apple started this, obviously in the name of privacy. So they've tried to champion privacy. I think we all wait in anticipation for Apple's foray into advertising and the nice personalized product they're going to be launching behind their walled garden. But initially, it was all about privacy. Then GDPR comes into effect. I was the guy who wrote the 15 data protection impact assessments for Crimtan as part of GDPR. 2017 is a year I will never forget. But I guess the principles for this were very, very good in that what GDPR tried to do was to try and make sure that for any use of personal data, that actually for a particular purpose, the company asks for explicit consent from that particular customer. Fast forward a few years, probably the longest ongoing saga with Google. I'm not actually going to put when they're going to implement it because we're not really sure, but certainly they started talking about deprecating cookies back in 2020. Now, the reason why this is all interesting in terms of measurement is because broadly, most technology systems from 1994 have used cookie as the tracking mechanism. And what this is showing is that that is on its way out. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that the breadth of customer engagement has just changed beyond recognition. So you might have heard it before, but like the concept of a funnel is dead, right? This is all about life cycle, and this is all about engaging the customer at various touch points. And I guess the problem with this complexity is that the customer has moved from this kind of quite linear funnel to something that's completely non-linear, also omni-channel, and also a lot of the channels that customers interact with are sitting behind these big tech walled gardens. So how, as a marketer, am I able to try and measure the combination of channels that is going to ultimately drive the best performance? And within this journey, there is kind of the rule of 7. So to actually convert a prospect, I need to maybe engage with them 7 times at least. To buy a product or service, so how on earth with all this measurement fragmentation can I actually figure out the best combinations of the different channels to allow me to do that? So because of these 2 biggest challenges, there are kind of 3 core issues that every marketer is going to face in the future. Now, I'm only going to focus on one. I'm going to focus on attribution and measurement. But actually, if you can solve it for attribution and measurement, you can solve it for a lot of the other stuff as well. So the first one that we've talked about, and lots of the keynotes have talked about already, is the whole concept of gathering consent. Obviously, with all this massively complicated different channel interaction, how do I make sure that I've got a single area of consent and that I've got consent for the particular purpose for the way in which I want to use the data? We can use data for relevant advertising, we can use data for measurement, but ultimately, how am I actually gathering that consent? Because of the fact that we've got this massive fragmentation, and I don't really know when I'm connecting with a customer and what I'm messaging them and when I'm doing it, actually, there are some bad targeting decisions, and there was a really good example of, like the lawnmower following, the gentleman around, the web for a period of 4 months just because he looked at how to cut grass type things. So that type of thing just kind of has to stop, and it actually is very, very damaging in a brand. And that is happening because that particular channel is in a complete silo from all the other channels that are being used. And then the final one is that these 2 points all flow into attribution and measurement silos. So what are the potential solutions to cross that bridge of fragmentation? So I'm just going to talk about a couple of ways in which the market is trying to address it and how you might want to address it yourselves. So the first one is in terms of signal triangulation, the concept of a deterministic signal. I'll try to spit that out. So the concept of a unified ID. So there's been conversations around CDPs, there's been conversations around CRMs, and the fact that these will sit across lots of different technologies. How can I unify, sort of that ID? But it actually goes much further than that, because obviously that's all around known customers. When you're doing a lot of marketing, there's a lot of unknown customers as well. How can I use that specifically to try and target a specific customer with consent across lots of those different channels? So, there are lots of examples of the way the industry are trying to solve this. So, hashed email IDs, login IDs, companies are setting up, sort of ID or unified IDs, so Unified ID 2.0 by Trade Desk, live ramp IDs, and all that sort of stuff. But I guess the key challenge is that there are lots of these solutions out there. There's no single ID. And let's be absolutely clear here that this requires consent. Yeah? So this is a piece of personal data, and I have to get consent for a particular purpose. How do I share that consent across everything? So, the deterministic signal that sits within a cookie, I require consent for. And alongside GDPR, there's probably a lesser known regulation called the Privacy Electronic Communications Regulation, or the PECA for short. And that actually is around tracking technologies. So actually using deterministic signals to track people, I have to ask consent in whatever format, cookie or not. So that's one option that the industry is looking for, to try and unify the measurement, to try and understand how a different customer and these multiple touch points might interact with a brand. The second one is probabilistic. I've actually put up a little URL there, so which is amiunique.org/FP. I don't know whether you guys have tried this before, but it really explains probabilistic very, very well. That is the concept of browser fingerprinting, right? So if you go in there, you click check my browser fingerprint, you'll see that based on your operating system, your IP address, your user agent, the languages that you've got installed on your sort of browser and all that sort of stuff, it'll have a look to see whether your browser fingerprint is actually unique. Now, I guess the challenge with that one, again, is that under the PECA that I just mentioned, that is a similar tracking technology and requires consent too. So these first two options, deterministic and probabilistic, both require consent. So, once we get to a point where consent is clear and unambiguous and customers are being asked for it regularly, the fact is that if they say no to either of those consented, that means that I can't measure or track that particular person. So I can't rely just on these mechanisms to actually measure what's driving good performance, because effectively, if 50% of people are consenting for measurement, then there's 50% that are completely dark. So the final option, and this is the one that I want to go into a bit more detail around, is this concept of digital signal aggregation. And this is the fact that within the internet, every single interaction creates a log file. And within that log file, there are certain bits of information. And actually, if I know what I'm looking for, I can aggregate those signals as potential engagements at an event-based level, not an ID-based and not a person-based level, and try to understand within a geomatrix what is driving good performance. Now, to actually do this, you need data scientists. So again, in terms of the context of what everyone else is talking about, I think at the moment in the UK, there are about 1 million data scientists. I think there are about 2 million businesses, so there's lots of data scientists to go around. Actually, in Europe in general, I think it's 10 million data scientists, about 20 million businesses, so the ratio seems to be about 2 to 1. But I think everyone is afraid, or lots of marketers are afraid, around advanced statistical modeling. And the point is that really, in this world, you need to get on top of this, and you need to be able to understand it, because without consent, a lot of the measurement things that we rely on actually just go away, because I can't report, I can't measure, I can't target, I can't do anything without consent. So the whole concept of statisticians has now become super trendy again, which is great, because I think it's super interesting. Now, when I look at how to model. So we're going to just talk about, sort of one of the solutions. So this is an actual model that we've done for one of our clients. You can see the modeled revenue versus actual revenue. So it's all about taking the data points that you do have and training a model for your specific requirements. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the specific requirements were in this particular example. Now you can get a lot of accuracy for this. And if you get a lot of accuracy, then you can use it to predict the future, right? So because you know what the inputs are going to be for your specific business, and so therefore what the outputs are going to be. So it might be revenue, it might be leads, it might be something else, but ultimately you have inputs and outputs. So the starting point for this particular model is these really clever chaps at Google back in 2017 wrote a paper on Bayesian methods for media mix modeling with carryover and shape effects. Bit of a mouthful. Obviously, they're statisticians, so they haven't, sort of pumped it up, but that's freely available. You can go and research it on Google Docs. And it looked at how you can take data signals for real-time modeling. Now, this is something that we've been working on with a number of clients. And what you can do is you can take the concept, but you can fine-tune it to what your requirements are. So go-to-market strategies, marketing spends, micro factors such as competitor and product demands. So we actually are plugged in, for instance, to the Google API, and we extract brand intent down to city level by week, and we use that as potentially a factor within the overall modeling. So this is all freely available information. Macro factors such as COVID-19 cases, you saw that in that previous slide, there was a bit of a dip. That is a macro factor that's going to impact the demand for your product or service. So you're putting in and you're defining for your own businesses what your inputs are. There was this particular client actually does a lot of offline media as well. So we built a geomatrix for all the different reaches, for all the different offline media channels that they were using, and we put our big ear to the digital ground to hear the response and the signals for those particular geos. So, ultimately, the model is freely available, but it's the inputs that are going to drive the correct outputs. And it might be soft conversions from digital engagement, so tracking particular engagements or nuances in the new events within your GA4. And it might be hard conversions or booking and sort of revenue as well. And ultimately what that allows you to do is produce outputs. So it allows you to start predicting the future by doing target modeling, because if I can predict the past, with all these different variables, I can start having a look if I put different inputs in, so different marketing spend by channel, what the actual, based on my go-to-market plan, can I predict revenue and compare this to overall targets? I can actually do it down to product level as well. So if I've got specific products and I've got specific campaigns focusing on specific products in specific locations, I can start to have a look on whether or not it's going to drive my ROI. And then finally, marketing mix modeling. So that again came up with the chat with Liz, and she sort of mentioned the fact that that was very, very traditional. This is obviously coming back. So just my final kind of takeaway is most people start with planning, then they try and figure out targeting, and then they then look at measurement. Actually, if you can get your measurement right, then the measurement should inform your targeting, which will then inform your planning. And so in rather a cheesy finish, 3, 2, 1, we have liftoff. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andy. So we've got time probably for one question before the break, and I'm going to go to Luke. So server-side tracking without cookies, based on your option, do you think we need consent for this kind of approach?
Well, it depends on what you're logging on the server. So, sort of, I guess most event server-side tracking doesn't include any specific, sort of personal data. I think if this is with reference to the impending rollout of GA4, so all of you who use Google Analytics would have received an email saying that Universal Analytics is being sunsetted in July 2023. So I guess the core reason why Google have gone to GA4 is because it's moving from being session-based to event-based. Now, as soon as you do server-side tracking, what that means is that actually, it's about tracking events and nuances within the events rather than actually browser-based, sort of cookie-type approaches, right? So Server-side tracking without cookies, generally server-side tracking doesn't use cookies. It might use an ID, but you're still going to need consent to do that if you put an ID into the server-side tracking.
Great stuff. Well, look, we've run out of time getting to the coffee break, but Andy, you'll be around for a little bit?
Yeah, so Pete and my other colleagues are over in the corner there. As you can see, we can talk about this for much longer than just 25 minutes, but thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Andy.